like to welcome Councilmember Kshama Sawant to lead our discussion on how to build the political revolution.
Thank you, sisters and brothers, for being here. Thank you, Jess and Killen, and thank you, Paul, for sharing with us an important message that our struggle is international. And we've seen an exciting weekend in Seattle and all across Washington state. We've seen Bernie having sweeping successes across the states of Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, which show that the political revolution against the billionaire class remains strong. And this is despite all of the obstacles that have been in our path, in the path of Bernie's campaign. You know, we've seen a media blackout of Sanders. We've seen the entire Democratic Party establishment lined up against him. And we've seen charges of unelectability leveled at Sanders at the time that tens of millions of people are rallying around his message. And you've seen his opponent, Hillary Clinton, the Walmart and Wall Street and war candidate, having super PACs of billionaires funding her campaign. And here in the state of Washington, look at how out of touch, how deeply out of touch the corporate political establishment is with the consciousness of working people. Bernie won by big numbers in every single county. And yet, aside from a few exceptions, the entire Democratic political establishment has not only endorsed Clinton, but many of them are super delegates. The governor of this state, Jay Inslee, is a super delegate and went out of his way to re-pledge his allegiance to Clinton after the results were announced in Washington state. And so we're seeing that while the establishment here in the US, similar to what Paul described in Europe, is out of touch with working people, at the same time we're seeing a whole new generation coming on to the stage of US politics. And regardless of what happens this year, they are here to stay. And so our question, the question that faces us as activists, as socialists, or as people who are probably about to join socialist alternative, hopefully, are thinking about what are we to do in our way forward? You know, what are the conditions we're facing? Let's just look at the lay of the land that is on offer to young people. Young people in America now are going to be historic, unfortunately, because they are going to be the first generation in America that is going to be worse off than their parents' generation. This is what capitalism offers to millions of people in this country. This is the generation that is also going to face the brunt of the threat of climate change. And it is no wonder that faced with these crises, this generation is also the most likely now to attend protests and participate in political rallies than their parents or their grandparents. And perhaps the best indicator of how we are in changed times is the openness to socialist ideas. The idea not only that we need a new system, but that we need that new system because capitalism has spectacularly failed, and all of that is revealed by the success of the Sanders campaign. But we're here not to agree with each other that Sanders has had a tremendous success despite all the political obituaries that were written about his campaign. We have to, have a deeper discussion. We cannot afford to simply celebrate the results that Sanders got in many of these states and look at things through rose-tinted glasses. we cannot afford to replace a clear-headed strategy with any blind hope that good intentions alone or willpower alone can overcome the kinds of obstacles that have already been laid out in today's discussion. We need to look at this situation more closely. We need to draw lessons from our experience so far, and we need to discuss how can we empower this movement to avoid being imprisoned within the Wall Street-dominated agenda of the Democratic Party. And while there are many states left to vote, and still millions who want to cast their votes, in many states, including the state of California, Wisconsin, and so on, as they did in Washington state, we also have to soberly recognize that the delegate deficit that Bernie Sanders faces, I'm talking about pledged delegates, not the super delegates, that makes it extremely unlikely that extremely likely that the establishment will succeed in blocking Bernie at the Democratic National Convention. So for us, this is a serious question. We cannot just allow the date for the Democratic National Convention to arrive at us without having prepared for it politically. Because Trump might win in the Cleveland Republican National Convention on July 18th. It is likely that Clinton will be coronated on July 25th in Philadelphia. So what are we going to be left with? Are we to say that workers and young people who are energized by the idea of a political revolution should remain blackmailed by an anti-establishment racist billionaire Trump or Cruz or an establishment Wall Street Clinton? So the question to us is, if Sanders is defeated in the primaries, as is likely to happen, are we going to allow this rigged political process of the primaries to mark the end of our historic movement?
Hell no!
Well, that is why we're here. That is why Socialist Alternative and I have been calling on Bernie to free his campaign from the narrow confines of the pro-capitalist Democratic Party and prepare a plan B for our movement. Run as an independent in the general election if necessary. Because my sisters and brothers, we need a strong challenge. We need to set a marker in history, a marker of strength to encourage activists from the labor movement, from environmental groups, the LGBTQ community, the Black Lives Matter movement, and beyond, to run candidates at every level, whether it's city council, state legislature, or national elections, independent of corporate cash, independent of the Democratic Party, to fight the racist, Islamophobic, right-wing, bigoted agenda of Trump and the entire right wing, and offer an alternative at the same time to the corporate politics of the Democratic Party. And whether Sanders wins or loses at this point, this movement has the potential to make a historic step towards building an ongoing political alternative for us, for workers, for the youth, for the environmental movement, against both Democratic and Republican parties. And before Sanders even announced his campaign last year, Socialist Alternative and I urged him to run as an independent candidate. Bernie's response to us was that he could have more impact in the Democratic primaries. But we argued that the Democratic Party, and especially the primary process, is a deeply hostile terrain for a grassroots challenge to the corporate agenda. Yes. It is not a terrain where a pro-worker, anti-Wall Street campaign can thrive. And we warned in advance about the undemocratic methods and structures the Democratic leadership imposes on the primary process, about the influence of Wall Street money, the bias of corporate media. We warned about the conservative character of the primary process itself, where conservative states are prioritized in order to tip the balance of any kind of sense of where the campaigns are going. So if Bernie accepts the results of the primaries and endorses Hillary Clinton, if he refuses to continue his campaign independent of the Democratic Party, then what will happen? All the momentum that has built up around this new kind of politics will be channeled into electing the same old corporate politicians. Just imagine the deep contradiction, telling all those millions of young people, some of whom are here in this room today, who have had a fire lit inside them for a political revolution against the billionaire class, telling them, oh, your next job is to vote for that exact kind of candidate that you have been so angry about and that propelled you towards Bernie's campaign. We have to do everything in our power to fight this contradiction. We want to feel the burn all the way through November. We want Bernie's call for a $15 federal minimum wage, for single-payer health care, for taxing Wall Street speculation to fund college education at public universities free for everybody. We want this message to be heard by millions more who are going to be paying attention to politics in the fall. But of course, it is completely understandable if people are fearful of the right-wing and bigoted message of Trump and feel afraid that if we call on Bernie to run as an independent, and if he did, then somehow that would end up playing into the hands of Trump, and that's why we have to just hunker down and vote for Hillary. There are lots of problems with this logic, but just for starters, let's at least confront the fact that there is no specter of the Trump presidency if Bernie runs in all the safe states, which are the states, 40 or more states that are not swing states. They are either clearly Democratic or clearly Republican. What is to stop Bernie from running through November either as an independent or with Jill Stein as a Green Party candidate? Bernie, unfortunately, has said that he does not want to run as an independent because he does not want to be a spoiler. So our message to our movement has to be that there is a way to run if people are worried about a spoiler. But I think it has to be, this logic has to be, thought through even more deeply than simply thinking about a safe states strategy. If the real fear that people feel is about Trump, then we have to understand that even if Trump loses this presidential election, which I think is likely, because you won't see a mass of working people go for his deeply misogynistic and hateful message, although that is not automatic. But the fact is that even if he was to lose the election this year, the threat of an ascendancy of the right wing and the right's ideology doesn't go away. The reason we see the right getting an echo among working people is because there is a deep chasm that has been left by the anger that people feel against the corporate Democratic and Republican parties, and it is just crying out for the left to fill that chasm nationally. Imagine the impact. Imagine it's after November, early November, after election night, and imagine that Bernie has won 10 million votes, potentially far more. But these are 10 million votes across America, not just in hippie Seattle, keep in mind. 10 million votes. just to take a step back, do you remember how many corporate media pundits said, oh, Seattle has the luxury of electing a socialist. This is not a message that would resonate all across America. Look where we are now. And imagine if in November Bernie has won 10 million votes of both rural and urban Americans. These will be 10 million votes for a $15 federal minimum wage. These would be 10 million votes for universal single-payer healthcare. These would be 10 million votes for free college education, 10 million votes to end the war on drugs and end mass incarceration of black and brown people. Would create an unprecedented, opening for running independent, left, anti-corporate, pro-working class challenges all across the nation at every level. And what has history shown us? What has history all the way from James Connolly in Ireland to the fight for 15 in Seattle shown us? It has shown us again and again that when working people get organized, come together in solidarity, and recognize that our common enemy is the ruling elite and the system they perpetuate, when we build mass movements to challenge the political rule of big business, that has a far more decisive impact than any given presidential election. And for those that you talk to, for those that we all have conversations with, which we should be doing, who may have doubts about the strategy of Bernie running as an independent until November, we should challenge them to look at the reverse scenario. Because if Bernie, and this is the reverse scenario, if Bernie does not run all the way through November, the field will be left open to Donald Trump to have a virtual monopoly over the anti-establishment anger. That would be a big mistake on the part of the left.
You run.
Because the real...
President Sawant.
I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves there. I would personally, sisters and brothers, before we talk about a realistic option that we have. So why would it be a mistake if Bernie did not run all the way and the field was left open to Trump? The problem is that corporate politics, the corporate agenda of Clinton and the Democratic Party, is exactly what has helped to fertilize the soil on which Trump's racist agenda has fostered. Many people who could be won over, we're not saying all, but many who could be won over to Bernie's campaign and message could fall into the trap and are now falling into the trap of Trump's anti-immigrant and hateful message. Remember what happened after Obama and the Democratic Party led the charge in bailing out Wall Street banks, the very banks that had crashed the economy in 2008. There was deep anger among working people that the very banks that took the economy to the precipice and destroyed millions of lives through foreclosures and unemployment were the very banks that got rewarded. And the rest of us were left out in the cold. And at that time, the Tea Party emerged as the only force expressing the anger against Wall Street and the economic crisis. And this Tea Party message twisted the genuine anxieties of millions of workers into a sort of hateful, anti-government political force and political farce. But this was dangerous in the absence of a real left challenge because the Tea Party swept away the Democratic Party's congressional majority in 2010 and has since deepened the Republican grip over Congress and state governments. So after the bailout of Wall Street and the left's failure and the labor movement's inability to put forward an alternative to the Democratic Party, that has meant that all we saw was the rise of the Tea Party, and the left missed a historic opportunity to cut across the rise of the far right. And we are facing a similar situation today, and my sisters and brothers, we cannot afford to make the same mistake again today. The mass anger that people are feeling against the political establishment is reaching fever pitch. This has left us with a historic opportunity that we need to build on. The teachers in Chicago and the Fight for 15 are preparing for a joint day of strike and action this week on April 1st. Let us send our solidarity to the brave teachers of the Chicago Teachers Union and the Black Lives Matter activists who are all challenging Rahm Emanuel, Mayor 1%. Students on college campuses are marching against racism and against student debt and for a free education. The protest that shut down Trump's rally a couple of weeks ago, again in Chicago, with the chants of Bernie, Bernie, shows the potential that if we are able to link our opposition to Trump to the building of a powerful left alternative, that is an unstoppable message this year. Absolutely have to build for massive, peaceful protests against Trump like the one that we are organizing here. We absolutely have to use that as a means to build wider support for the movement against the billionaire class on the streets. But there is a grave risk of another historic failure if we allow Trump a free rein and monopoly over the anti-establishment mood. That is why it is so urgent to build a strong force of, for, and by working people. And we are not only talking about movements on the streets, we are talking about building power in City Hall, in the state legislature, and in the halls of Congress. We have to break open that safety valve that Paul was talking about that works so well for this system. Socialist Alternative has consistently argued for the need to build such a political alternative. And for years, we have been told that this is utopian, that the two-party system is too strong. We could never fight it. We were told that big money will always win over people. We were told that protests were well and good, but we have to make do with the Democratic Party when it came to elections, and we have to accept what they were willing to offer. But then, look what happened. The Occupy movement broke out, and in 2013, when we ran as an open socialist against and in defiance of the Democratic establishment in Seattle in 2013, when we campaigned boldly on $15 an hour, we won. We won $15 less than 6 months later. And then last year, in the face of massive opposition from the establishment, in the face of every anti-15 business rooting for our opponent, in the face of a Republican set-up super PAC, we were again able to win the re-election of an open socialist. And just like we talked about the historic amounts of working class finances that Bernie's campaign has run, we did the same thing in Seattle. Our campaign last year raised more than $500,000, not taking a dime from big business. And this was the highest amount generated of any council campaigns in the history of Seattle. So my sisters and brothers, there is an urgent need for us to discuss how we are going to initiate this new political party for the 99%. And we want this party to have genuinely democratic structures, not democratic like the Democratic Party, really democratic structures, where we, members of the party, will have a say in who runs as our candidates. We have a say in holding our candidates accountable to our working class agenda, and a party that will run candidates boldly against Wall Street and against both the big business parties. We are calling on Bernie to launch a national conference of his supporters very soon, and that those on the left join this discussion and make plans to run independent candidates on a pro-worker, anti-corporate platform all across the country. This process could begin our, this work of building a party of the 99%. And our electoral victories in Seattle have been so decisive that it shows that Bernie's campaign and the response he got were not a one-off. They're not incidental. Everything that we have seen in Seattle and in the response that Bernie has received is a phenomenal indicator of how we are moving into a new period of struggle and resistance. And we need to build that struggle and resistance. We've seen a huge and growing interest in socialism, and young people particularly are looking for an alternative to the failed system of capitalism. And look at the system. Look at the glaring indictments against this system. 62 people, the number of people that can fit on a double-decker bus, own the same wealth as the entire half of the population of the world. That's more than 3.5 billion people. This is a system that feeds on disaster and on the misery of billions of people. This is a system that in a city like Seattle, which is experiencing tremendous growth and a construction boom, has led to a skyrocketing of homelessness, a skyrocketing of rents, and increasing unaffordability for most of us. This is a city that has been indicted for systematic biases by the police department against black and brown people. And not to mention the challenge we face on climate change. This is a system where just 90 companies globally and historically have been responsible for almost 2/3 of the carbon emissions in all of human history. As Paul said, we need to take these companies into democratic public ownership, because that is the only way we will be able to fight the threat of climate change. And that is what socialism is all about. putting people and the planet over profit. And that is what we are organizing for in Socialist Alternative. That is why I appeal to you to join Socialist Alternative, because we will not be able to build these immense struggles and resistance that we need to build unless we get organized. And as you know now, when you join Socialist Alternative, you become part of an incredible international movement of our sisters and brothers on every single continent on this globe who are also fighting against capitalism. The most important lesson, perhaps, of our successes in Seattle in electing and re-electing a socialist and all the successes we've seen in the movement for 15 and so on, are really because we have Socialist Alternative as an organized force. And it is important for us to take this seriously, because politics under the conventions of capitalism is presented as personality contests. But this is not how we build movements on the back of one person. We build movements on the back of hundreds, thousands, and millions of people. And that is why it is really important that you all become part of Socialist Alternative. Because we have shown that when we get organized, we can win. And when we build a strong backbone of working class people, we can change the entire political agenda of a city. If we allow our movement this year to be channeled behind Clinton, it will inevitably mean the disorganization, demobilization, and demoralization of this movement. If we want to fight against this, if you want to be with me in carrying forward the movement of a political revolution, if you want to seriously fight for an independent party of the 99%, you need to be together with Socialist Alternative. Let us get organized. Let us join together in urging Bernie run all the way through November. Join us in building this movement for a socialist transformation of this rotten and corrupt system of capitalism.